My mother's name was Shepherd, and my dad was a Gray. Grandpa Gray was born in England, and Grandma Gray was born in Ireland. He looked like a Jew, because I've seen pictures of him. He had a beard. I had a funny experience with that grandfather. He's the second one I want to see when I get to heaven. I want to see Jesus first, but then I want to see Grandpa Gray. My oldest sister remembered him, and when they laid him out, she said, he doesn't look natural without the Bible in his hand. He was a saint. My mother loved him. She used to tell the stories about how Grandma Gray sent him to the store, and he'd just about get back and, well, George, I forgot this or that. And he'd say, oh dear, why don't you try to remember? You know, very kindly. I said, go and do it yourself. But my mother didn't care for her sister-in-law or her mother-in-law, but she liked Grandpa Gray. Everybody liked him, they said. He said, oh, she's such a sweet baby, but wouldn't it have been nice if it was a boy? Because I was the third girl, and he wanted a, well, he was satisfied that it was a good baby, but wouldn't it have been so nice if it was a little boy? Well, he should have lived a little longer. The next year she had her first little Gray boy, and she named him George after them. Her father's name was George, and so was his. So it was George Shepherd Gray. He took her maiden name, too. But I had an experience about my grandfather that I don't believe in spirits or anything like that. I'm a Christian. I don't believe they have any doing, but there's something about the universe that we don't understand. It was preschool, because I had come home from Sunday school and I was sick. Well, my mother sent me to Sunday school sick. I didn't feel good, and she said, go to Sunday school, that's a good place for you to die. Because I was going to die, you know, when I was sick. She was real tough, you know, stern. It was the German measles, the long measles. Oh. And I was very sick. Oh, yeah. And all I can remember laying down, and I must have had a fever, and I dreamt that devils with pitchforks were after me. I was in a manhole, and then all of a sudden I was laying on we had a black leather couch in the dining room, and I was laying on that, and this man came and didn't say a word. He picked me up in his arms like this, you know. When he put me down back on the couch, I felt better. And a couple of years after that, when we were starting to school, Mama had an album and she brought it out. And I said, that's the man that picked me up. She said, oh no, he was dead by the time you were that old. It was Grandpa. My grandfather was a real good religious man. He used to preach Jesus on the corners. I liked all my grandparents. My Grandma Shepherd, my mother's mother, was a tiny little wiry. Oh, she was full of pep. She would get up and scrub on top of everything, and she did house cleaning for a living, because my Grandpa Shepherd died when when her last baby was just about 1 year old. So then the 7 girls just doted on that one boy. Uncle Phil was just like he was a favorite. She's born here. They were all born here, all of her family. Grandpa Shepherd was born in England, And Grandma Shepherd was born in Alsace-Lorraine.
Is she only 75?
I looked a little older than that.
Yes, she was the happiest. She finally broke her hip and went cuckoo in the hospital. You know, she was always asking for Grandpa, and he'd been dead for a year.
My mother was a very good, she worked at an orphanage and was sort of a nurse there. And she was very good at taking care of things, because when Marion was born, they didn't expect the baby was alive, and they threw her over in the chair because they wanted to take care of my mother. And the baby let out a yell from being thrown, you know, and the doctor said, "It's alive." So, and because she was born with a crooked leg because she was cramped or something, I don't know what it was, but my mother straightened that leg out by rubbing it.
Oh, yeah?
She really was good at doing all kind of medical things. You know, she used common sense, but she was real firm.
My mother doesn't go to church because she never had to close to where she said never had the kids home all the time. She was a Methodist, and she was very strict. I was in 3rd or 4th grade. She was moving from Woodlawn to Purdy, and she wanted me to stay home and help her for the afternoon, and I cried my eyeballs out because I didn't want to stay home. I wanted to go to school. I loved school. And finally she gave me a whack on the face and sent me to school with a cried out eyes and swollen face, and I didn't care. I got to school anyhow. My mother was very strict. She thought we should help her before we gone to school.
My dad was born in Canada. It's right across the border. He was the youngest boy. There was a couple of girls that were born here too in Canada. The older boys were born in England.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, there were 8 of them.
What type of things did your father used to do?
My father was, well, when I knew him as a little kid like her, he was a trolleyman. He worked for the IRC on the streetcars, and he was the one at the side that the people off, and then he ding, ding, ding when it was all clear so he could go in the front.
Yeah.
And in the Polish market down here, he said, the ladies would come and she'd say, "Do you go by Broadway?" And he was so disgusted because they were running ladies. He says, "No, we go by Electric." And he ding, 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 go on with the trolley. He got reported. Well, he probably would. He was full of those kind of things. After he went off the streetcars, he was a carpenter. He was a cabinet maker before that, so he really was into that. So then he went to build homes out here in Englewood section for Mr. Ferrari. And that was the time the Depression was just starting. So when he built the houses, Mr. Ferrari didn't have money to pay him, so he let us live in a house until he paid off his debt.
Yeah.
But we didn't have money for food, but we had a nice house that we had 3 new homes to live in. One of them my dad built thinking he was going to buy that because it was a nice place.
How did your parents meet?
She met him on the trolley car. And my mother said when she married him, she said she thought he was a good sized man. But she said when he started to take off first one layer after another, there was nothing left.
And what was your mother like?
My mother was fat. She wasn't real fat when she was married. Daddy said she looked like that when she was laid out to take all the fat out of you, or the water, or what it is. And I said, "Oh, that don't look like Mama. She's too skinny." And he said, "Well, that's what your mother looked like when I knew her when we got married." She had a large frame, like most of us do. They were just starting with pictures, and he put this black thing over his head and over the camera, and snap, he snapped more pictures. Yeah, well, that's who my father married. I mean, we didn't accept that marriage very well, but, and then he ended up that he didn't accept it either, but
Oh, your father got remarried.
Oh yeah, Carolyn was his second wife. She was his wife when he died.
Faith was the Miss Priss beautiful one. I was more of a tomboy. I preferred to be a boy. I didn't want pointy toes like girls have on their shoes. I didn't want to have a bust. I said I didn't want to grow like a woman. But after a while, you get conformed to it. So I guess my genes sort of leaned to be, wanted to be male instincts, because it was always, but although I was always mothered George, he was a year younger than I was, and I was like a mother to him. I was the tough one, and he wouldn't fight. He'd say to the kids, "My dad could beat your dad up," and then when they'd get after him, he'd run and hide behind me, and I'd fight his battles. But George was like my protege, you know. I had to take care of him. Him and I were inseparable, like friends. Then later on we had Bob, was the first baby I had to take care of. He was a doll. He had long curly hair.
Mother put dresses on him because he was too fat to wear pants. My mother said, "Oh, that child, he'll eat everything." She even had him put in the hospital, the children's hospital, to lose weight because he was much overweight, much. And he found a way to get out of the bed and go and steal cookies in the kitchen. He was such a good baby. He was like her. He was satisfied with everything. He'd sit in that playpen, and I had to watch him out there because he was out on the farm.
As long as you gave him his popo, you know, the pacifier, and he ate his pacifiers up. They had jelly in them. I remember when we were kids celebrating the 4th of July and going down to the front. This was way before I went to school. And my dad had an old Ford. We all used to pile into it. And the 4th of July came that it was my turn. I had 2 older sisters that wore the clothes first, and then it was my turn. And we had a flag dress. And I couldn't wait till it was my turn to wear it, you know, or I fit in. Well, Faith was much heavier than I was. When we were little, I was smaller than her, a lot smaller. Now, when we got older, of course, I got so much bigger than her, but I got the flag dress. I'll remember that 4th of July, and we had balloons. And the Cook family lived right next door.
Oh, yeah?
And Mr. Cook used to get these great big tubs of ice cream for 4th of July, and he'd dish them out for all the neighborhood kids. Huh. And of course the Grays and the Cooks together were like a whole neighborhood. You know, there were so many back and forth, and our back doors met each other. On the 4th, we'd go down to the front to roll down the hills, and we would lay down and roll down the hill in the grass. And then up at the Maston Army, they had a reservoir on that. That was really a hill. And, oh, my mother would have died if she knew half of the things that I did, and I'd take George with me and do them too. We'd take a cardboard and get up at the top of the reservoir and slide down it like a slide. Well, if you slid off the bottom, it was about a 5-foot drop, and there was the sidewalk and the street. But you don't think about them things. Being a lot of construction, too, I took them over to where a garage was half up and half down, and they had a plank coming out the window, and there was a big pile of sand down below. So I went up, and we got up the plank. I said, "Come on, George, jump out in that sand." Well, he didn't want to do it, so I said, "Okay, I'll go first, and you follow me."
I got him in more trouble getting in puddles. We took turns with the boots to see how deep the puddle was, and one time I put my foot down in, and it was an empty well. And I started going down, and George grabbed a hold of me. Well, then the boot got full of water, and boy, to get hollered at it, Mama, was worse than anything. So I said to him, "Come on, we'll go home and go down the cellar. I'll take the boots and dry them out down." I did a lot of things that if one of my kids had done it, I think I'd have beat the heck out of them. Yeah. I got hitched on the back of a rag wagon.
So you had one pair of boots for all of you?
George and I had about the same size feet. We were lucky to have shoes and one pair of boots. That was great. It fit George and it fit me and Faith too. It was boots. They were boots, not Arctics or anything. We did get Arctics when we were real little that snapped over, you know. And I wore button shoes up my leg, and I have a fat leg up here, see? And the button hook, I couldn't get those two upper buttons buttoned with the button hook. And in kindergarten, I was such a wallflower. And I'd sit there, and the kids laughed at me and made fun because I couldn't get my shoes buttoned up. Oh, kids are unmerciful.
If anything touched anything on the plate, I remember that I was little on Maston Street and I pushed the plate over on the table, not going to eat it if it touched each other. And my mother and father had been arguing, but I didn't know, I wasn't old enough to know anything about that. I know that there was words, but when I shouldn't have pushed the plate that night because my mother said, "Frank, what are you going to do to her?" Because Daddy would never spank kids, the boys, yes, not the girls. So he got the hairbrush and gave me one smack on the back end, and boy, did that sting. I went like a bullet out the front door. I'm running away. I was always going to run away. I ran out the front door and to the back door, and they locked me and let me in. Then I sat there and cried. I'll never forget that sting. That was the only spanking he ever gave me. My mother would take a tin cup or a back of her hand and smack you all over. Any place she could get a hold of you. And she was like quick out of the night, you know, you couldn't get away from it. You wouldn't know. I swear she had eyes in the back of her head. But my dad was very much different. He would talk to you. And I never thought I'd get the hairbrush. I never saw him hit anybody with the hairbrush. But he did hit me anyway. Boy, does that sting. Ooh. And then it hurt worse than it stung because I wasn't used to him hitting me. I suppose it did, but to this day I remember that sting.
They brought the house next door to us on Maston Street, and they were redoing it. You know, he was tearing the inside out and fixing it over. They first moved in on a Sunday. My mother invited all the kids over for toasted cheese sandwiches and gingerbread. She was a baker. She baked almost every day. They were so nice.
My mother-in-law used to say, "Oh, Mrs. Gray, if I could only have a brown-eyed baby," because all of our Grays were brown eyes and she had all blue eyes. So when Irene was born, she's the second to last one. She's my favorite. She's the only one that's left. She's out in California. She had kind of hazel eyes. And she said, "Oh, I knew I'd have a brown-eyed baby just looking at those brown eyes next door, you know."
Yeah.
And my mother always wanted a blue-eyed baby, and I was the closest to the blue-eyed because my dad had sort of greenish. Well, then, when we moved away, see, finally Daddy lost his job. He went through the Depression, and I was in second grade, and I had just gone into third, and we moved over on North Street. That's, you know, a little way away. And we got in there, and there was bed bugs and cockroaches, and my mother could smell them in a minute. Well, the minute she saw that there was, she fights them by taking boiling water. And, oh, that was we only lived there 2 months. But I went to 48th school there. I remember I was just went into third grade. And because my spelling was so bad, they put me back in second grade.
Just for the spelling?
Just for the spelling.
Wow. I'm glad they don't do that anymore.
No, well, 2 months and I got put back. Well, anyhow, we went out after we moved from there, we went out to one of the, out in Englewood.
They put Starin Avenue through just as we lived there. We used to go over and break the tar bubbles.
So you actually had an outhouse in one of the homes.
Oh yeah, and when we lived in the farmhouse, it was right on Englewood too, and we had a red curtain on it, or a green curtain. My mother was in it when the green curtain blew off one time. We were right on that main street, but then it didn't get much traffic. But oh, those outhouses are for the birds. Of course, they had a little potty for the kids for at night, so that we wouldn't have to go out to the back house at night.
So all those kids were using that one outhouse? The whole family?
Everybody, when you've got an outhouse, that's the only bathroom.
Yeah.
We didn't have electric either because my father couldn't pay for it. Yeah, that was during the Depression, and things were really hard. We had to go out, and the kids, we'd pick up coal from the track that ran back there, way behind the house. We'd pick up coal, and they were building houses, so we'd pick up lumber that they had cut off. And they had trees, and I was the best sawer in the world, but my father said, you'd never make a good carpenter because I sawed crooked. He said, you make yourself more work that way. But I love sawing wood.
So did you burn the coal? Or the...
My mother burned it in the stove, and she had to heat the water on the stove, and we had kerosene lamps. Audrey was born, my mother was cooking some sauerkraut on the stove, and the big kettle dumped over on her feet, and I don't know how far pregnant she was, but it caused the baby to abort. And so she had it right in the farmhouse because it wasn't her, that was Audrey. I didn't know anything about babies and how they were born. I didn't know my mother was carrying a baby. And but anyhow, we had Audrey, and she was premature, of course. What they did, the baby, she was ready to die, and the doctor took blood right from my father to the baby. Never typed it or nothing. Now, Audrey is a slow learner. Boy, she's smart at remembering names. She can remember things like everything, but they found out when she went to school she's a slow learner. And whether that was from that birth defect from being a shock or what, but at that time they didn't consider that. As long as the baby lived, that's okay.
All I remember my father saying, now you aren't the baby girl anymore. I took Audrey to kindergarten, and she said, the teacher said to her, tell your mother not to dress her so warmly, because my mother dressed in rifles, scarf around and everything. So then, if I ever told my mother that, she would say, tell that teacher I know what I'm doing or something, you know. So to make peace, I just used to let Mama wrap her up, and when I got right before the school, I unwrapped Audrey a little. Audrey was a beautiful little girl, though. She had beautiful blonde hair and great big brown eyes. And Eddie was just like a little doll. He came next, and he was terrible to take care of. He had a will that was he still, when I tell him about it today, I tell his kids about it. Yeah. And he said, Dorothy, don't tell them them things about me. I said, well, it's the truth. You were, and he's still a headstrong man because he's a male chauvinist. His wife is an angel. She's just the same. Aunt Patty, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, she's just a
They send nice letters.
She's the one that she calls about every week. Mm. They had about 10 kids. I can't keep track of how many they had.
Now, your school, what was your school like? Were you all in the same classroom?
We were all there were 2 rows of desks that were first grade and 2 that were second and 2 that were third. Mm. And so George was in the next 2 rows, or either the first 2. But Miss Fisher, she couldn't understand how he could be my brother and be so different. Mm. He was defiant, you know?
Yeah.
And, I loved Miss Fisher. We had a big pot-belly stove in there that she had to keep going and putting wood in. And we had an entry like where you put your coats. And she put the bad kids out there, and George ran home one time when she put him out there. Another time he went out there and filled his pants. Oh, he was a humdinger, George. Then when we moved, after, we only lived there, out there until the farm school, Audrey was born. Then we moved, one of my mother's cousins had married a man that was building in Kenmore.
Hmm.
So Daddy went and helped him build duplex houses. And one of the duplex houses that he built, he moved us into. And it's the same house where Linny lives,
Oh, wait.
on Kinsey Avenue.
Okay.
But we only lived there about 5 months because we went to Washington School for a short time. Then they moved us back into the city again. See, you only lived a place a short while because that's all the money you had to pay rent. Or to, your wages from it. So when we moved back into the city, we moved down Woodlawn and we went back to number 8 school. Well, we only lived there for about a year when we had to cross the street. Purdy Street was right on the corner there. We moved over there.
And he took anything. My dad was a hard worker. He worked for the PWA here where they shoveled walks and that. He'd do anything, and then you'd get a pile of coal. When we lived on Purdy Street, I remember a lot of times we were fortunate to get coal.
Then after we moved from Purdy Street, we moved on to Ferry. Faith and I used to go out and we picked cinders up off the street, and we had a little inner thing from a golf ball that somebody left, and we played jacks with them, and we were happy. We loved music. We listened to the record player, and my dad loved good music, and he had opera singers that went,
Opera singers?
Did you have a radio?
And I would try to mimic them.
My husband that I married was teamed off with Marion because he was her age, see? Then Herbie was next, and he was teamed off with my sister Faith. She's a year older than me. And Bobby was my boyfriend. We used to roller skate together and heard them talking about dandelion wine. We'd go and pick the tops off of dandelion. Ooh, is that bitter. Ooh, terrible.
Was it even alcoholic, or?
No. We didn't even, you couldn't
distill it.
We were just kids. We were only about 4 or 5 years old.
So you just put it in water?
We put it in water and stirred it up, and that was dandelion wine. And it tastes bitter as gall.
When did you start dating your Bill?
Well, I didn't date him at first. I dated a red-headed boy. And they lived across the street. They were an Indian family, red-headed Indian. I fell in love with love in first grade. I never knew anything about marriage or anything, and I had this little doll, and I was going to be a father. I wanted to be a father because I liked my father so much. I was going to go to work with my lunch pail. My mother said, "You can't be a father, you got to be a mother." She convinced me that. Well, then I decided, okay, I'll be a mother. But by first grade, I was going to be a mother, and I had a doll that was one of my kids already. I didn't have any boyfriends then, but any little boy was all right. I didn't know anything about sex or nothing. But you wouldn't in first grade. Oh, there were a couple of little guys. I always did like the boys. I'm love-proof. I just fall in love with love. The little boy that I liked, his name was Edward Yatter, and they went to our church here afterwards. They still lived out here, but he was in the 2nd grade, and I was in 3rd. The 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade were together in a farm school, 2 rows of this one,
Uh-huh.
And I liked Edward, and one of the kids had a birthday party, and they invited us both to it. They played post office.
What's post office?
Oh, you don't know what post office is?
No.
Oh, you missed out on life. You know what it is, don't you?
No.
Oh my goodness, was a game that they played where somebody'd get in the closet and they'd call a number and they'd have to go in and give them a kiss.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, and I thought, this is my day. I get kissed by Edward. Now, I was only in about 3rd grade then. But when it came my turn, I called Edward's number. I got the right number, okay. But he said, I can't go in and kiss a girl because my mother told me not to kiss the girls. So I don't know who I got stuck with. I don't know who I kissed. You just kiss the guy and out the next one comes. So when we moved back out here after I was married, I saw Erna. Erna was just a baby when we lived out here because I was in 3rd grade and she's 10 years. She wasn't even thought of because she's 10 years younger than I am. And when we moved back to the city again, we went to Bethel Lutheran Church. There I met the rest of the Yotters, only they had grown up. Martha and Erna were Edward's sisters, and they had another brother too, Skip. But I didn't know him so well. Edward and I were 2 of the older ones. And I said to Erna, what happened to your brother Edward? Because he was at a church. She said, oh, he got killed right on the corner of Edgewood where we used to live and Englewood. He was on his bicycle and a car hit him. I said, see now, if your mother would have left him go with me and get to be a girlfriend, he might not have got killed. She laughed. She said, her mother too used to say to me, it would have been nice if you were my daughter-in-law. But God didn't have them plans for it. But Erna and Martha are 2 nice girls. We always invite them to the family reunion. Didn't you see them last year? One of them had a nervous breakdown from her husband's death, and she still feels morose, but she's not quite as bad as what she was. She's getting over it. Edward was my first, I like boys like that, they sent me Valentines, and I would have kissed them if her mother let them kiss me, but I think I didn't even, when we lived on Purdy Street, we came back to Buffalo then. That was still during the Depression. And I liked this Richard. We used to play baseball together. Richard Farman. I always picked for skinny guys too. My older sister, being much older, she knew the ropes and everything. And she said, he held my hand, and she said, if he puts his arm around you, hold his hand so that he doesn't get fresh. Well, I thought, what the heck is he going to get fresh from, But I would have liked him to kiss me, but he didn't. Richard and I just were friends, more boy and girlfriend for playing baseball. Did
you play baseball?
Yeah, we played it in the street. With my brothers were on the team. We were about 11, 12. Was in those years.
Maybe he didn't want to kiss you with all his brothers around.
Well, there were always a lot of people out on that big porch. We all got together on the porch, and my real close friend that I had for life lived on Purdy too, Annie Bonanni. She's in a sort of a nursing home now.
We had to walk to school, it was across the fields.
Uh-huh.
And a little old house, and Miss Fisher was the nicest old maid teacher, and I was her favorite. But I thought that was my baby. And he was mouthy. He'd say to the kids, my dad could do this, and my mom could do that. And then they'd go to run after him, and he'd run. He was a good runner. But I was so afraid for George, I'd get a hold of the boy. I'd beat more boys up for him. My mother would yell out the window. I'd have him down in the field punching him, and she'd yell out the door, Dorothy, get off that boy! Don't hurt him! But I just couldn't bear to have George hurt. I was like that with the rest of the kids.
Yeah.
I thought I was their mother instead of theirs. And I got George in a lot of trouble because I was a tomboy and he was sort of a meek and mild kid. Well, my mother wanted a boy. She called me Tommy all the time, so I played the part. when you're tall, you want to be short, and when you're short, you want to be tall. My oldest sister was so short, and she always wanted to be taller.
Oh, I think guys always want to be taller.
Yeah, well, I was tall, and I didn't want to be tall. I was one of the tallest kids, so they put me near the back of the class, you know. And I liked sitting in the front because at that time I must have had trouble, I don't know, hearing or seeing something, because I could get everything better in the front seat. But I never got the front seat because I was one of the taller ones. I'd sit in about the second or third from the last seat. Oh, I'm glad I was born an Englishman, or I'd have never been able to pick the language. I can't pick up French, I can't pick up Spanish or anything.
So I'm trying to teach Autumn some Spanish. Autumn, she pronounces a few consonant combinations wrong. One of them is the SP. Instead of Spanish, she'll say Spanish with an SF.
What does
sound.
she call spaghetti?
She calls it getty.
And I used to say spaghetti.
Spaghetti.
A lot of children can't get that SP, and they'd say spaghetti. Oh, and my dad was a real good, and he was a good speller too. Oh, he used to get wild when he tried to teach me my spelling. He said, "Where did you get that letter from?" Oh, and then I'd get so tense trying to please him. And the only way I could spell was to remember it. Memorize what the word was.